The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
The disciples of John came to Jesus saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "The wedding guests cannot mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them, can they? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast." The Gospel inspired by God. I think that we live in a culture and at a time in human history when we have lost touch with the great archetypes of the collective unconscious of the species and its symbols. We either don't understand the symbols or we misunderstand and misrepresent and misinterpret the symbols. And so today, Ash Friday, and we're celebrating the ceremony of the imposition of the ashes. And we think somehow that in some ways that this ceremony of ashes and fasting is about trying to appease the anger of some rage-aholic divinity who's been seriously bent out of shape by our infractions of his law. And so we're cowering, and we hope that by some kind of self-flagellation and self-abnegation that God will take pity on us, that we're so miserable to begin with because we've visited misery on ourselves by sitting in sackcloth and wearing ashes, that he'll have pity on us, and won't punish us like he intended. And of course, there's nothing got to do with that. The first thing is that, God is love. And I don't mean that love is an attribute of God. I mean that there are synonyms. Love is God, God is love. There is nothing in God except love, and there's nothing in love except God. And so it's not just that God has love as an attribute, like he's good at playing tennis, or he's a good investor. It's not that it's an attribute, it's that it's the essence. God is love. So there's no sense in which God is a rage-aholic. Secondly, God does not punish, and as I say many times, does not even forgive. Because in order to forgive somebody, I have to temporarily hold a grudge against you, and then subsequently, even if it's reluctantly, let go of it. But God doesn't hold grudges. And so God is the only person in the universe who doesn't forgive or doesn't need to forgive, because there's nothing but love when God looks at her creatures. So the next thing is the notion of sin. That sin is not the infraction of precept. That there's a bunch of laws and you break the laws of the commandments, and that's a sin. Sin is being asleep. Sin is being unable or unwilling to respond in love to situations. So the only sin is being asleep. And waking up is about coming to the realization that the only thing that's real is God. Only God exists, only love is real, and everything that exists is a manifestation of God. And so whatever you look at, whether it's an oak tree or a human being, you're looking into your own face. It is God looking into her own face. And so differences have to melt between us. So this is what it means to wake up. And so this great symbol then of Ash Wednesday, where we put ashes on our forehead, it is not a symbol of death or kind of self-abnegation or cringing in the face of a rage-aholic God. It's a beautiful, beautiful archetype, a great, great image. And I've used this with you many times before, this story where for 11 years I lived in a small little cabin up in Healdsburg, and I had a wood-burning stove, which I have now transferred actually into my own house. And it's a little wood-burning stove called a yodel. It's a Scandinavian design. And every fall I'd go out with my chainsaw, and there'd be lots of trees down in the forest, particularly madrona and oak trees, and I'd chop them up into foot-long sections and then split them with my axe, and then over the course of the winter I'd burn them in the wood-burning stove. And at the end of the season, I'd have maybe 9 or 10 buckets of ash that I'd thrown out into the garden. It's great fertilizer. Wood ash is great fertilizer. But I'd have just about 10, buckets of ash. And it always amazed me, how in God's name did I reduce these huge big madrona trees or oak trees down to this? And of course I didn't, because 60% of the bulk of a tree is actually carbon that it's extracted through photosynthesis from the sun. So it's literally built its body. It's a bodybuilder that builds on sunlight. And when you burn it, you return the light back to source and the heat back to source, and what's left over is what Mother Earth had contributed to it, nitrogens and stuff like that. And you give back to Mother Earth what belonged to Mother Earth, and you give back to Father Sky what belonged to Father Sky. So when you think that you're sitting at a fire and you're getting warm from it and it's lighting up the room, light represents consciousness or coming awake or being aware, and warmth represents love and compassion. So what we get from Source, what we get from God is the ability to see clearly, to come awake and to be filled with love and compassion. And so the ashes are the symbol of that realization. They're not about self-abnegation and cringing in front of God. It's the realization, look, I'm wearing the residue of this dance between Father Sky and Mother Earth. At the end of when we actually do the ceremony, the old Latin phrase was, when you put the ashes in the form of a cross, you would say, memento homo quia pulvis es, et in pulverum reverteris. Remember, O human being, that you are dust, you're made out of dust, and unto dust you shall return. And it sounds like it's a real put down, don't get beyond yourself. You're made out of dirt, and you're going back to dirt. That's not the sense of it whatsoever. And it's fascinating to me that it doesn't even say, remember, human being, that you are dirt, and unto dirt you will return. It doesn't say dirt, it says dust, and there's a big difference. Dirt is kind of solid and grounded. Dust is ephemeral, it just blows away. You get a wind and it's gone, it just traveled. And that's, for me, that's the whole point of it, using dust instead of dirt. Because the wind is just another word for the spirit. So what you're actually doing is you're reducing your sense of self to particles that are totally working under the baton of the spirit. They blow whatever spirit wants it to blow. So we've taken this elegant spacesuit, which is very, very important for our human incarnation, and we realize it was crafted from Father, Son, and Mother Earth, and when the mission is completed, we reduce it not just even down to dirt, but even to dust, so that it is totally under the baton of spirit. That spirit can now do with our soul, our essence, what it chooses to do, or what's on the cards for us. So we leave, the material with which we articulated and fabricated the spacesuit for our mission, we give it back to the planet. We recycle it ecologically so that other beings can pick up these particles and make a spacesuit of themselves. It's a little bit like the neurons in a brain. Now, we've got billions of neurons in a brain, but what allows us to think and to feel is not so much the neurons as the circuits, the connections they make. The little circuits, maybe 150 neurons will create a little circuit, and it'll be the way in which I remember a phrase. But the same neurons can now recombine in different reconfigurations and create a totally different circuit. So it's the ways we connect up. And the same thing is true with this spacesuit. That of the 70 trillion cells in your body that get recycled after you've finished your mission, they get reconfigured by different people pick up different elements from you. Even when we're alive, we're sharing the molecules of our bodies with each other. In the course of our hour together here this morning, you will literally share millions of molecules of matter with the rest of us in this room. Because there's actually a limited number of molecules on planet Earth. It's a vast number, but it is not an infinite number, it's limited. And we keep recycling it, among contemporaries and among historical characters. So there are people sitting in this room this morning who have molecules of matter that once belonged to Jesus Christ, or Mahatma Gandhi, or Mother Teresa. They just keep recycling. So we recycle literally the stuff of which our physical bodies are composed, so as to give back to the earth and to each other the gift of incarnation. No, it's not the molecules that determine, the psyche inside, or the soul that inhabits it. So it doesn't matter. You can take material. You can go down to a garbage pile and pick up a whole bunch of scrap and create something really extraordinary from it. There's I remember seeing a video a few years ago of a band, a kids band. I think it was in Guatemala, where this very famous conductor dedicated himself for several years. Have you seen that video? And the kids are just making drums and flutes and things out of scrap that they find in the local dump. And they're making, literally, an orchestra, their own instruments. And they travel around the world under the sky. So it doesn't matter where you pick up the stuff from. It's what you do with it that matters. Yeah, I do believe, I think it goes hand in hand with the loss of the archetypes and our loss of our connection with nature. I think they go hand in hand because very, very often nature existed long before human beings came on the scene. And the collective unconscious is the place where all the great driving forces of the evolutionary process that began on planet Earth 3.7 billion years ago with the first single cells, and then moved through, the great sea creatures, and then the amphibians, and then the reptiles, and then the mammals, and then, the hominids, and then Homo sapiens, and then Homo sapiens sapiens, and eventually Homo spiritualis down the line. That the driving forces between all of those, they came out of nature. And when you cut yourself off from nature, it's like you've cut yourself off from 99% of the actual evolutionary trajectory, chronologically speaking. And now you're attempting to understand life with this 0.1% of the data available to you. So getting back in contact with nature is a hugely important part of it. And also allowing us, to be in contact with our imaginations. And again, if you spoon feed people too much data at the same point, they don't have to use their imagination. When you think of little kids, when I was growing up certainly, and I loved to play cowboys and Indians, you had to try to figure out, what was going to be a gun, a piece of a branch of a tree or something. And where were you going to get a hat that made you look like a cowboy, or a feather that made you look like an Indian or whatever. So we're casting about for stuff, and our imagination is filling in all the blanks. Now the imagination doesn't have to do that much work because you've got computer screens and iPads, and so they're all pre-packaging all this stuff for you. So we're not using our imaginations to the same extent. So if you're cut off from your imagination and you're cut off from nature, then the archetypes, make less and less sense to you, and you have less and less ability to work with the archetypes.